Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Wendy Jean-Paul, Engagement Partner for the Carrier Community EC3. Co-hosting with me today, Dave Felton, Engagement Partner for EC4, and Alan Bruce, Engagement Partner for EC5. Our agenda today includes guest speakers from Accord, Advantage Go, Verisk, and the London Market Associations. Their time and support is very much appreciated. We look forward to hearing from them shortly. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along, and there is also a little time at the end of our session for any further thoughts. As we have a full agenda today, I will hand over to Alan for our first item.
Ben? Right, so the next few slides, well, next three slides, we've kind of taken from the 5th of December event. I don't know how many of you were there or how many of you have seen that content, but it provides a useful recap and some context for what we're focusing on for the year ahead. We'll then also include elements of insight from the service providers and the associations, and of course from Accord as well, who've kindly joined us today. So moving forward to the next slide. This slide was really about recognising some of the progress that's been made across Blueprint 2 last year. The three lines, open market, DA and claims. In the open market world, the focus has really been around data and structured data and how that will enable digital processing, automation of digital processing. So we know that we had the consultation on the CDR. The CDR was approved by the Data Council. We've also done consultation on the MRC version 3. And the feedback coming back from that has really given a rich sense of information from the market and insight to help refine the guidance notes around that. That's still being worked through, and the aim is obviously to get that published at the end of Q1. There's been a build going on the technology side through the joint venture. This is the platform that is going to build those digital solutions to enable that digitalization. So IPOS for premium accounting settlement, ICOS for claims settlement and adjudication. So there is a lot actually happening. Sequence 2, which is the global build of those platforms, is nearing completion. Now, whilst that doesn't focus on London market business, what it does do is demonstrate that the technology is actually there. So as we get past the delivery of that, it will be great to be able to hopefully demonstrate that platform to this market to see a sense of what you will be getting as we work into the London market variation of it. So when we look at DA, there's been predominantly around improving the systems that have already been available through DA. So with DCOM, we've actually made a number of enhancements based on market feedback to make it more user-friendly. We've got that integration between DCOM and DDM. And we made some difficult decisions, or brave decisions to a degree, around not doing some activity in the DA space. And, you know, things like the ingestion engine for data into DDM, for example, and the condition of trade for using DDM. That was paused based around looking at the DA strategy, linking it to the joint ventures solution and the capabilities and possibilities that that might bring. And obviously, from an LMA perspective as well, how that might align to future DA strategy. In the claims world, again, the build around ICOS, that's one area, but the key thing in the DA space was around faster claims payment, now live. We've got 17 managing agents signed up for that, and now it's around working with them to identify the binders that can go into that process to deliver faster claims settlements for our clients in the marketplace. So really, I mean, they're probably the key things around, delivery for last year. So if we move on to the next slide, it's around zooming into what we're going to be looking at for this year. So we have got, as I say, sequence to the global premium and claims platforms being finalised in Q1. One of the things that came up last year was we'd made an assumption that we'd have a market cutover date, a single date where everyone in the market would move to either the transitional services or the end state digital services on day one. Currently exploring what other options there are around that. Is there a better way? We can't just decide that for ourselves, so there will be engagement with the market around how that rollout happens. So what could the market support in terms of maybe a phased approach? What complexities will that bring? But also maybe what advantages can it bring? So that work will continue through. We'll also be seeing the build of sequence 3 and sequence 4, which is the London market variations, the key bit for this market. So we're building up the market engagement through what we call the 3-in-a-box model, where we ask for subject matter experts from market firms to come to workshops to look at the different components of the build and give their view around and ask questions around, does it do that? Could it do this? What if it didn't do that? So having that market expertise is really vital. And I'd like to thank the associations for working with us to find those SMEs for each programme increment that we get to, the 3-month body of work that we move on to. And so that will continue. We'll also be looking at market testing, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail and beyond, but sort of starting in Q2 2024 and really picking up more in earnest in Q3. And obviously the digital gateway delivery being the final part of the build happening in 2024. From the kind of, I suppose, vendor and market milestones, we know that detail is what you've been after. The specifications around messaging, we've just started to release some of the EDI specifications. We've got them out there for ILU and settlements, and they will continue. And the last of those EDI specs will be published by into Q2. So you'll have those detailed information about specifications, which will help you and your IT teams for those who've got self-builds, or you and your service providers who support you to understand what the gap is between the messaging today and the messaging tomorrow, whether that be for the transitional EDI messages. And then later on, we'll have the full API specifications published, and that's around the end of Q2. We've touched on the MRC version 3. If we get that published at the end of Q1, there's still work to do to make sure that that's adopted in the marketplace. So again, I know the Data Council have put the information out there around expectations around that adoption. There is an update process already in place, as advised by James, that the market already follows that process in recognising and working with the latest version of the MRC. So we'll be following that and tracking that through as well. So more importantly, some of this is about, I suppose, the tangibility of things. How do we really bring this to life for the market? And as you can see, we'll be starting to look at training material by the end of this year. So getting people sat down and seeing that there is actually materials available for IPOS, understanding what they're all about, and then moving into training early in 2024. That will really make it real for the market participants who need to interact with those platforms. So looking ahead, there is a lot actually happening this year, has happened last year. It is the time where we do need to think about and be proactive around readiness. I think last year, a lot of the conversations around investigating where you were with certain activities, what kind of messaging do you have, what formats do they come in, and looking if there's any variations or tailoring of those messages that you might have. So this year, we really do need to make sure that we're moving into a planning stage with clear plans around your journey to digital end state, whatever that may be. So looking at the next slide to zoom into the deployment approach that we talked about. We recognise that those different nuances on how this could be rolled out need to be discussed with the market. So we will be reviewing all those different possibilities. We will be taking insights from the market, building out a delivery plan. That plan is due to be shared in Q3, but there's a lot of work to do ahead of that to really get to a point where we can share it. But it's really, I suppose, an interesting conundrum as to what would be the best way to get this delivered, whether it be class of business, whether it be by type of business, or whether it be by all those questions yet to be answered. So you can see the timeline around that. And then if I move on to the next slide, what we're really looking at is if we want to take action this year, what is it that we really need to be looking at? Now, we have actually provided a number of artifacts to the market, and your engagement partners will have run through a number of these with you. but it's clearly having a good understanding of what the solutions are. You know, we've got the playbook that's been published by the LMA, we've got a LIBA version, and I know there is an IUA version being launched next week. That does give a great amount of context and detail about the solutions. So understanding that pretty much inside out would be really helpful. The customer journeys that we've shared show really the data flows within the marketplace in the new digital setup. So taking time to follow those through. I know I've had sessions with some of my group and with shared with the other groups to really follow those data flows and understand what's required when, how it works in the new world. The benefits framework. Now that, again, another meaty bit of information, looking at some of the advantages and benefits of the digital solution and breaking it down by the solution itself, by part of the value chain. There's a lot of different angles in that information around how this benefits yourself. That can be used to build a case for change, a business case for change. It can be used to help you decide on your journey to digital end state. Are you going to target transitional at the start, making the smaller amount of change required to enable to continue working in the marketplace? Or do you want to leapfrog that and go to end digital state? But that obviously requires use of accord messaging. And so some people already utilize that within their firms, others don't. So it's a bigger step depending on where you are today. But again, having a clear view probably in Q1 around whether you're transitional or end state and your journey is going to be key. As we said, you need detail, you need specifications. We've started to release those already around the EDI specs. They will continue for the transitional, the API by Q2, as we mentioned. But working with your IT teams, if you've got in-house systems, or working with your service providers now, having those conversations around what is it that we need to do? What are you doing to support? We've got AdGo and Verisk here today, so hopefully they'll be able to shed a little bit of light in that area as well for those that utilize those. But again, it's being pretty clear around the effort required to make the changes that you'll need. So will there be resourcing required? Will there be budgeting required? And who's actually going to own the plan that moves you through that process? And I think the last box on here is around progressing the known unknowns. We know that the market wants the details. We haven't been able to give you all of the answers to all of the questions that you have. But what you hopefully have seen is that is starting to happen now. We've got the kind of question portal, or you've asked your engagement partners questions. We've responded to those. As more information comes out through the conversations that were happening, especially around process roles and responsibilities through the Data Council, there will be more information that comes answering some of those questions that you haven't quite had the detail of the answers to. But with a program of this size and complexity, that has to be expected. We can't have all of the answers on day one. It's being delivered in an agile way. So more information builds and builds and builds and builds over time, which means the information is released over time too. So thank you for your patience. Keep asking the questions. And if there is a question that you've still got in the back of your head, please do ask it, whether it's today, whether it's through the portal, whether it's through your engagement partner. There is no silly question. We really do need to understand what it is that you want to understand around the change to enable you to enact the change. So moving on to the next slide. In terms of the Data Council, they've done obviously a huge amount of work in coalescing the market around agreeing the core data record, looking at the MRC version 3 and obviously the guidance notes now. I think in the words of Sheila Cameron, I mean, looking at your in-house data and making sure that it's aligned to the GRLC data standards is one thing that can obviously be done today to prepare for digital end state. Aligning your in-house systems to the MRC version 3, again, predominantly sitting with the brokers, but there will be some activity that carriers might need to do. And with an expectation that firms will be using that MRC version 3 from September onwards. And then also considering, what is it that you want from the data? If we have more granularity data of a higher quality, how can you utilize that in your firms for benefit? How can you make sure that it flows where you need it to flow, where's it going to come from, what's it going to connect to, and what it's actually going to deliver you, what insights can that data provide for business benefit. So I think moving on from the focus there, so the next slide please, Dave. It's kind of nicely links into, from a data perspective, into the Accord world. We've got Clarissa, who's kindly offered to come and share some information with us. So Clarissa, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Alan. Good morning. My name is Clarissa Monticello. I am head of GRLC at Accord. What I'd like to go through today is how Accord is supporting the Blueprint 2 initiative through the messaging into and out of the Bureau. Can we jump to the next slide, please? Actually, you've jumped one slide too many. The first is the CDR. So the CDR data set was handed over to Accord in June of last year to turn into a messaging standard. So we have worked with various participants in the market to develop a whole new message specifically for the CDR. The way that it's going to work, or the message flow, is brokers will submit a CDR to the digital gateway to facilitate the creation of a central risk record. Lloyds will be able to take that information and access syndicate lines earlier in order to facilitate their tax and regulatory reporting. What you can't see, well, what isn't shown there is no messaging flow from the digital gateway of the CDR to carriers. So I think that's an important point. The digital gateway is not delivering at this time the CDR to carriers. And we've created a new message for this. It'll be API based. The first drop of those API specifications will be in February. We are expecting a second drop to complete the set. There's 5 touch points. The first 3 touch points are included in the February drop. And then in probably Q2, we'll be delivering the second drop, which will be endorsements and pre-accounting. So it kind of aligns with the natural business flow of placing. Next slide, please.
Sorry, can I ask a question just quickly?
Sure.
What you've said there is what's important for me. Essential. Digital gateway will not deliver the CDR.
It is not in scope.
Not in scope, but could we put that on the slide as a start at the bottom?
Sure.
So we can, when we talk about it internally, I can say, this isn't my interpretation, this is actually the position today.
Yeah, so there'll be no CDR being delivered to carriers at this time. The process flow does not include that. That doesn't mean it won't be there in the future.
Yep.
As part of the PR&R consultation, it might be something that's requested by carriers, but as it stands, there's no flow from the digital gateway to carriers. Right. Any more questions on the CDR? Right, we'll jump to IPOS. IPOS, premiums orchestration system. Brokers will be able to submit standard EBOT messages to the digital gateway. The digital gateway will validate those standard EBOT messages against the central risk record that was created as part of the CDR flow. Carriers will receive EBOT messages off the back of the JSP processing for information or agreement, depending on whether you're lead, follower, what the process is. There'll be indicators in the message to tell you whether there is a requirement for you to agree that transaction. And as always, Lloyds will receive tax and reg information off the back of those EBOT transactions. There have been a number of standard enhancements requested to Accord to facilitate central processing, lead, follower agreements, etc. They are currently in. They're currently being reviewed by our community. We expect those to be in end of Q2. Right, questions on IPOS and EBOT?
Marissa, can you just clarify? Obviously, we've got the difference between end state and transitional. Obviously, if everybody's in end state, both the brokers and the carriers, that's fine. There's a CDR record and you validate the EBOT against that. But am I right in thinking that if the brokers are transitional, they may not submit a CDR and therefore they just submit an e-bot.
Yeah.
So I know Exchange are then going to try and do some
Vision
transitions,
services.
but will we have the information to get the correct e-bot message?
So DXC will not be generating their own EBOT messages. If the broker submits an LPAN, as they do today, so if they're in transition services themselves, not transition services, if they haven't moved to digital, you won't be able to receive an EBOT message for that transaction.
So in that state, so if you, for example, said you're going to end state
Mhm.
and you're getting stuck on the broker who's.
You're in transition until the very last broker.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm trying to understand. So what will you get? That's what I mean. I understand that. Obviously, it can only go when all the brokers transition, but I'm understanding from our carrier processing point of view, what am I going to do with those broker transition entries if I set everything up for
You
standard e-bots?
you would be receiving 2 messaging channels until
So,
it's an interesting point, needs to be worked through. But as it stands, DXC will not be creating EBOT messages if the broker does not submit it.
so if I understand you correctly, then if, in our case, where we received the call for all messages, we'd still get those
You'd still get
transitional items,
Yeah.
but the new one. So then we're going to have to identify what sort of message we've got and push it down a different processing channel.
That is the way it currently sits.
Um,
It's an interesting point.
Is that something that's being looked at in more detail at this time, or?
It's not being looked at specifically by Cord.
Mhm.
I believe the JSP is looking at ways to make that transition easier for carriers.
Yeah, see, I'm quite concerned about that because, as to how we're going to sort of interpret what's coming in. Because at the moment, all the messages are the same, should we say?
Yeah,
So we don't know what to do with it. But, and if we do it by broker, obviously, as soon as the broker switches, we've got to know that. So, I mean, there is a degree of administration.
Yes, I think that's a definite area that we need to.
Needs to
look
be
at
explored.
and come back on. I think.
Sure, I mean, I know we discussed it before, Alan, but I just wanted to raise it with the wider group.
It is an interesting point, and I think it's something that's being looked at for transition. Let's address the first one. If there's no CDR record, it would just be the same as processing today. If there is a CDR record, but the broker submits an ANS, they'd be able to validate against the CDR to some extent, not fully. And you would receive just the same transactions that you received today. Same EDI-ish transactions, or a cord for all, if you receive a cord for all.
But theoretically, they could be different to the current ones.
That
So
is
in
a
fact,
JSP.
you're saying in fact that there's not 2 variants, there's potentially 3 variants.
That's
So I think there's clarity that needs to be brought on that, David. And
No,
definitely
absolutely.
we need to kind of document and come back with a fully supported.
No, thank you.
It's a good question and one worth raising with the JSP. As far as a quarter enrollment is making changes to the EBOT message to support those, the central service processing. Those changes will be standard, so it will be across all EBOT, not just for Bureau. Yeah,
No, thank you.
that's all right. ICOs, I guess. Brokers will submit standard ECOT messages to the JSP, and the JSP will be able to run simple first notification of lost validation against those ECOT messages by accessing the CDR records, and they'll be able to form a claims marker in order to create a claim within ICOs. Carriers will receive the ECOT messages as in the way that it's been received from the broker, with the information only indicator available where they are a follower. Similar to ICOs, we need to change that to ECOT. Similar to ICOs, we have a number of standard enhancements being reviewed through our community in order to make that claims orchestration work. The validations that take place on those first notification of loss will speed up the process. Fairly simple. That is the overall model. It is end state. We can talk through transition if you'd like, but that is the end state process. Questions on that?
Thanks. I think for me, it's similar to what we've just discussed. If a broker's going to go through transitional services and submit a new EDF-MRC version 3, DXC's transitional services will create that to import CDR. The broker's then going to do an outbound, right, as we've just heard. How are they going to do that for the claims then if they're not digital?
Same process they follow today, either directly onto Class or via Lincoln.
Class and Lynn going to be replaced by iClass.
Yeah, so there'll be some process for submitting to ICOS, but it won't be an ECOP message. Those are really questions for the JSP, but they won't. If the broker doesn't submit an ECOP message, an ECOP message cannot come off the back of the JSP.
I think one of the things that we have been talking about, if people are in transitional services and they send an EDI message, it's translated into the digital ecosystem to create a digital record. The activity happens, it's translated back to an EDI message, which is sent back to the participant. So that's the general ethos for how it would work in transitional services. Any other?
No, I wanted to keep it relatively high level, but we can talk more specifically if anybody's interested. I'm sure if anybody's got specific questions. Happy to take questions offline if people want a little bit more of a deep dive and talk through the specific changes that have been requested.
So there's just one from me. I mean, we're talking about this from a lawyer's perspective. What about the IUA? Because you're going to do this process for the London companies market, right?
Okay. Same flow. It's
Same
exactly the same flow. What will be different is there won't be any tax and reg to Lloyd's. Same flow for global, same flow for IUA, same flow for Lloyd's.
So is there a version of these maps that are also going to be created for the IUA market?
Not specifically, no. It will just be missing those. It will just not have the Lloyd's flow. This one off the back. Everything else is exactly the same.
And I know that we've got some company markets in the room today, and some of them don't necessarily utilise Accord messaging today. So, you know, how would you look at sort of engaging with them to onboard them onto Accord in the future if necessary?
So it's directly on a peer-to-peer basis or through the JSP?
Through the JSP.
Exactly the same way as we would Lloyd's.
Yeah.
There is no difference in terms of process for us. It is the same message standard, whether you are global, IUA or Lloyd's. That was one of the remits that we had for Blueprint 2, single way of working, single process, irrespective of whether you are working on a peer-to-peer basis, whether you're Lloyd's or IUA. That was, I mean, if you notice from a broker's perspective, it is exactly the same. No matter who they're talking to, it is the same message standard.
Great. Any other questions for Clarissa? And silence, in which case.
Okay.
Thank you.
Happy to take questions offline. Thanks.
Thanks, Clarissa. So we also mentioned that we had a couple of service providers in the room. You may wonder why we've got Advantage Go and Verisk. It's around the communities that you're part of. Probably about half of you utilise Advantage Go, and the other half probably utilise Verisk predominantly as your service provider. So we thought it'd be a great opportunity to invite them along to give a sense around how they're looking to help their clients and really what they need from you as their clients to help them. So we were going to start off with Courtney from Advantage Go. If you could give us some insight.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Courtney Davison. I'm the program manager for Blueprint 2 at Advantage Go. I was given this slide to talk to, it's not mine. How are service providers supporting their clients? So we at Advantage Go do a number of things in that regard. So one of the, if there's any of our customers in the room, I've seen a few. We're having regular user forums. So every 2 months at the moment, we get all of our customers into a room, tell them what we know, tell them what we don't know, tell them what we're planning to do next, keep them up to date with where we feel we are in the process. It's a two-way process. They can ask us questions. We can either answer them or take them away and find the answers out ourselves. We're in the process of doing a pilot with Accord, quite high level. We just signed contracts with them to do it'll be a message interchange process. We haven't built the solution underneath to do anything with those messages. It would just be a can we take them, can we send them back, can we read the format. We've obviously got the EDI specs that have just come in. I say just in December they came in. Reviewing those, assessing what implications there might be to our systems. We were told that there weren't any changes in them. We just need to confirm that for ourselves and go through all of the governance to make sure that's true for our systems. So we've got a team doing that at the moment, and we will continue to do those as they come in over the next few weeks. We're also talking to our customers on a commercial basis about what the implications might be for the next couple of years financially and their commitment in that regard, which touches on the next item. What can you provide to us? Well, obviously, I'm afraid, despite the amount of license fee you pay at the moment, we probably need a little bit more to get the next stage done. So thanks in advance for that. And we also need your help with regards to resources. So at some point, we're going to need to test this. I know you guys are already doing lots of projects and programs and deliverables, but we can't do this in isolation. We can't do it without you. And we're going to need your help and your assistance and your patience and your time and your people to help us through that process. So there's two elements to that. We will build our solution and we'll need your help to verify that that works in isolation. We also need to test as a market-wide community to make sure that the end-to-end mechanisms work as well. So there's two pieces to think about when we talk about commitment to testing. Typically, when you're doing a functional delivery, we build you something, you test it, we deploy it, and you go forward. In this case, it's twofold. We'll build a messaging solution and prove to ourselves that it works, but we won't have tested that in a market-wide capacity. So something to think about when planning for resourcing. There'll be two aspects to this. It's kind of unique in a way in that it's something that we can do collaboratively across all of our customers. So everybody won't need to test everything. We can take a view that across our user group, certain organizations can test certain bits, other organizations can test other bits, and we can collectively come together and say, yes, we're confident that this will work. You will have to take a competitor's word at trust though to enable that process. Other than that, we're listening to what you've got to say. We're getting questions. We had an interesting question in our last user group about sort of non-standard processing. What happened? A certain organisation does something slightly out of process with a message. How do we consume that processing into the new world? Will that still work? Do we need to develop some new functionality to make that still happen? Or is it picked up by the new world and doesn't become an out of process mechanism anymore? So things like that. We're very busy. We've got a dedicated BA team who are constantly looking at the solution. I've got after this, I'm going back to a workshop back at Advantage Go for 2 hours to go through what they've come up with recently. Assess that. We'll present that, the findings from that at our next session, which is the 26th of January. That aren't invited or want to come on. I think that's it. So on the subject, any questions from anybody?
I know one question that has come up, and I will ask Rich the same as well, is around what's your level of confidence about having your solution ready for all of your clients by the required time?
At this point, pretty high. We've got, based on what we know now, we've got an approach that we have pulled and pushed and challenged, and we're confident with our technical teams, are confident with our BAs, understand it. When we have issues, we do go back to the JSP, and they've been very good about answering that. Not necessarily via the FAQ system, I must admit. I used to work there, so I've been cheating a little bit. But we're with what we know at the moment, confident. If something changes, if something comes out of the woodwork, if something is dramatically different, And when you're working in agile, it's not necessarily set in stone. You don't necessarily know everything when you set off. If something changes, we'll be less confident. As things stand, we're in good shape.
Yeah, that sounds pretty promising. And the other question I've got to go
Is this
to
being
as well
recorded?
is just around, you mentioned around the commercial side of things. So what's your view on trying to make it as cost effective for your clients as possible? How are you sort of dealing with that aspect of it?
So we're managing it on a year by year basis. So we know what our current solution is going to cost in terms of development, in terms of testing, in terms of preparation to get it ready for the start of MAT. So the difficulty is when you're working in Agile is to see much further than that. So we've assessed what the cost is going to be until that point, on the assumption that something may well change in the time being. But we're doing it as at Vantage Go, we're doing it as a user community, so we're able to share the burden of the finances across our organisations. And from the people we've spoken to so far, it's been quite positive response. So along the lines of, why haven't you asked me sooner? Where have you been? So yeah, so in that regard, commercially it's going quite well.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. Any final questions?
One at the back.
Courtney?
You're developing it for the community that uses the share systems. How will we understand the commercials behind this, and is it going to be shared between us in terms of?
Yes. So we have a number, a development number that we think is the number of days it's going to take us to develop our approach as it stands.
Yeah.
There's all of the program management processes around that. There's testing around that. We've equated that into a figure as though it was a functional development for you as a customer, and essentially, basically, we've divvied it up across all of the subscribed customers to share the financial burden. I'll talk about that in the next user session.
So you're going to break down the cost as well, so we know what proportion is for, say, the absolutes, testing, and things like that as well. There will be questions that I'll definitely ask.
Sure, and like any organisation, you have to justify the cost that you're charging to your customers. We can't just pull a figure out of the air and make a nice healthy profit on it and pretend that you're not going to know what we're doing. So yeah, in my role as programme manager, I'll need to justify all of that spend. What I would say is we've spent a lot of money so far that we haven't charged anybody for. We've sunk quite a lot of our own investment in this up until we've basically written off everything until now. So the charging starts from January, but we've already developed our approach and spent all of the time and effort on that so far.
Courtney, just quickly.
No problem.
I mean, so we're talking about commercials. Has there been any sort of comparison of potential transitional service costs versus specific,
Well, there had, although there was a slight curveball earlier in their session that we'll need to review. Our assumption was, and our assumption still is, based on the EDI specs that we've seen, that there won't be much involvement in preparing for transition services. If the EDI services stay largely as they are now, then our systems already consume those, so it should be relatively straightforward. But if the EDI specs involve any development, then that's currently not included in the amount that we're talking to you guys about for supporting Blueprint.
Great. And I know the ethos has been very much trying to keep the EDI messages as similar as they are.
Yeah, and the program team have said that's the route they're taking, is to keep it as close to as it is now, for that very reason. So otherwise you'd have to develop two solutions. You'd have to develop an EDI solution and a digital solution, and then you're doubling the cost and the resource and the time, which becomes unsustainable.
Okay. Looking around, any last questions for Courtney? Or
I hope you've got as many questions for Rich.
I hope they're all out.
yeah. Well, he knows what's coming at least. But there we go. All right. In which case, thank you very much, Courtney. Thank you. Rich, would you like to?
Right, it's good to see everyone. We're going back and then forward. Yeah, there we go. I'm Rich Burge. I work in our business engagement department over at Verisk. So My background primarily on getting carriers live with our various systems as part of our SQL suite of products. So I'm going to be talking about very similar things to what Courtney went through. Again, so this slide, we didn't prepare this. I'm sure there are a lot more aspects of the formula, but we'll focus on what service providers are doing. So what we're doing to support our clients, what we need from our clients as well. So to start off with, I think a theme from 2022 was very much around us setting up our engagement communities, ensuring that we had the lines of communication open. We also took great leaps forward in putting together scenario-based, high-level technical design documentation and solutions overview. So thinking about different aspects of primarily how processes might differ with the detail that we're still awaiting, mapping them into different scenario-based approaches. Additionally, so looking ahead at 2023, what we're going to continue to do is embed ourselves in those engagement forums. So for the likes of engaging with Lloyds, ensuring that we are submitting questions, detailed questions, particularly around process points that need clarification. Everyone should know how to do that submission via the web form. I think it's in all of our Lloyds engagement community members' email footers, which I found. Thank you, Merrick. I think you told me about that. It's very hard to find with the QR code. But yeah, so if you need to know where to find it, do that. So we're going to continue to do that. What we're also going to be looking at doing throughout 2023 is deliberately client by client, looking at what an upgrade plan might look like, getting you through transitional services, and potentially with early adopters, looking at implementing some of the full digital solutions piece by piece. Additionally, what we are going to be doing is setting up design workshops with you. So very important, and one of the points that I will get to on the service providers and what we need from our clients is ensuring that shared understanding. So making sure that we are producing the right material off the back of what we know about the market issued material, and preparing for those sessions with you. Moving on to what we need from you. So we need you to be informed. There are so many different process points and detailed areas that we need to be looking at, and that are still to be confirmed as well. We need to be talking the same language around full digital. We want to help that by creating our own material and talking with you. That does need an understanding from our clients that when we are talking to you, we are talking to the right people. So linked to that is looking at your organization. If you have silos between your IT and your functional business units, recognize where you might need to be improving some of those communication channels as well. So additionally, just some housekeeping, I think this was mentioned earlier as well, keep up to date with process maps, your user journeys and your data flows. So before we get into moving to the next state of business, we need to be making sure we're working from a baseline, a clear understanding of how you operate at the moment, or you can move into what's to come. We know change is moving from that state to that state. It's going to be very easy or much easier to communicate that and educate your teams if we're moving from known state to known state. And I mean, an example with that is document management storage. So if you are working with your data entry driven by a document in a repository, consider how that is being used across your lines of business, across products. Make sure that is mapped, for example, because that might have implications specifically on the data entry journey. If we're no longer relying on that document as the central reference and we're looking to more digital type approaches. So that's one example. Process maps and data flows, get those in order. And yeah, I think that's it from our point of view. Any questions before the obvious ones?
Yeah.
When are these design workshops planned?
We're looking to kick off in earnest in Q2.
Okay.
So it's as we've been assessing the incoming EDI message specifications for transitional services, we're looking at this program to maintain BAU and look at the move to full digital. Will be prepared from Q2.
Are vendors like yourselves now go involved at all in these discussions around rollout strategy and stuff? Because in the binary world of, transitional or digital, it's probably fairly, manageable as a solution. But if things go kind of class of business or stagnant, people have hybrid ways of doing things in the solution, where we have the solutions that you guys create. So are you involved in those discussions with the JSP and all?
Not yet, but it was very encouraging to see that the recognition of that big bang to a more phased approach is one that's being put on the table. That was an approach that we have been putting forward from Verisk and recommending that we think more carefully about.
Yeah.
Considering as well, especially with developing in digital, we want one big go live where everything can go wrong for everyone all at once. We need to be applying those agile principles. Could go wrong. We need to be applying those agile principles to our delivery as well and learn from those implementations.
And probably just to provide some reassurance around that, yes, Dan certified will be involved. At the moment, this was brought up kind of towards the end of last year. So with the JSP is a bit of a headache to try and work something through, but that market engagement across Q1, Q2, to be able to share the plan in Q3 gives the time to be able to have those conversations. But yeah, just want to reassure you, absolutely, we'll be looking for some insight there.
Yeah, one of the earlier slides sort of mentioned the funding line with the GR LLC.
Yeah.
And 1233. How sort of aligned do you think things like IPOs are at the moment? How much work do you think they affect the downstream system?
So we haven't estimated the workload. We do know mapping will be required. Conceptually, a lot of it does link up the concept of contracts, split by sections, participation as well, very much aligned to our data model already. So fundamentals we believe are in place, but that mapping exercise, we know in any time we do it, the devil's always in the detail. Any other questions?
Just the office once I've gone.
Yes.
That's the same thing. From a commercial perspective, we don't remember what you from them.
We're still in discussion around anything to do with commercials at the moment. There will be a different way of looking at it when we think about BAU and supporting you as existing clients to ensure you're able to conduct your business. As far as the enhancements are concerned with respect to the move to digital, it's going to depend on the benefits of what you're going to be able to save with respect to the efficiency. So, I mean, commercial models, it's not my area of expertise, but where we've had model based on bums on seats and we're now promising improvement to efficiency and potentially, reduced team sizes, that's something we're thinking about as well. But I can't really speak much about that.
So you've kind of pretty much looked at the commercial part in that answer. So the other one is just level of confidence around having the solution ready for all of your clients at the required time.
Yeah, we're optimistic. I think the building blocks of the engagement model we've had to date really lends itself to ensuring a far higher likelihood of success. We've liked this way of working. We need to be ensuring that when it comes down to detail, responding to questions and us raising questions, Marek as our vendor community engagement partner has been doing a great job. So yeah, we're optimistic.
Okay, thanks very much.
Any last questions? Good. Thank you all.
No, thank you both. Thanks. So moving on to the next part was really around the associations. We just really wanted to give an opportunity for each of the associations to do a similar kind of bit of insight around how they're supporting their members and really what they would hope from their members to help create success. So we'll start off actually with Matt from the LMA. So if you'd like to come and share some thoughts.
Morning, everybody. Actually, I probably won't really talk about how members can, how our members can support yourselves. I think that's pretty much a question for you guys, but I do want to talk about, what we're doing this year, how are we supporting you, our members. I recognise quite a few folks in the room, but not everybody. I guess half a dozen sort of key things that I wanted to talk about really. So first is Playbook, and we've heard or seen a little bit about that already. Obviously, we launched our playbook last August. We started that work back last May even. So at the time, I mean, if I'm completely honest, it's hard to call it a playbook really, because at the time, as Alan was saying earlier, there were so many known unknowns. So I think it was really more a collection of everything we knew at the time in one document, but also importantly with as much detail as we thought we could provide on what we know that we didn't know. So it was about a provocation, getting the market thinking about what they needed to do. It was about trying to maybe use that expression, leveling up, getting everybody on the same page of understanding. And we very much intend to produce a full playbook this year. So Q2 is really what we're targeting. I guess there's a couple of or few key things that need to have happened before that playbook could really add any additional value. So the go live approach that's been talked about, clearly we need clarity on that before the playbook can talk to it. So that's due to happen by May. And I'm sure we'll start to get clarity before then. So we'll start to work that into the document we're going to come up with. But very much it's a real big ticket item that's got to be understood. I think the other really big topic is the process roles and responsibilities work. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail, but clearly we need to understand all the outputs from that before that can go into a document. There's the DA data strategy, Lloyd's piece, which if you saw the playbook, I'm sure you've all seen the playbook and read it many times. You'll notice that there's just lots of blanks for DA because we didn't really have much information about DA and we're waiting for the Lloyd's data strategy to sort of land. So again, that's a big ticket item to go in. And again, the known unknowns, as Alan said, these are unfolding. We provided a bit of an update because 6 months on from first round, we did know a bit more, but there's still more to know. And actually, probably as things change slightly and evolve, maybe some new ones arise. So we want to be able to answer as many of those as possible. I think if we hung on until the very last one was known, we'd probably publish something 2 minutes before go live. So I think there's a balance to be struck as to when that happens, and perhaps just still being conscious of yet known unknowns. But hopefully those big ticket items I've talked about will largely be known by then. I think the other thing to mention, the sort of questions that came out to Clarissa and some of those process flows, we need to be able to answer those with clarity and give you clarity. So they're all the things that we're thinking about for the playbook. If I'm completely honest, I'm quite apprehensive about the timescales, because if we're going to hold ourselves to account and get this out to you by, let's say, May, it feels pretty tight given the amount of stuff that we still need to put together. But if it gets much later than that, it starts to lose its value because time's ticking on. So there's a tension there. I am reaching out to people in my network to just chew the fat and ask you guys what you think it should contain. Having a couple of copies even today on that. If you desperately feel like chewing my ear off and I'll buy you a coffee, then by all means pick up the phone and I'm happy to sit down and talk about, what do you think was missing from the first one? What do you think needs to go to this one? What would really help you? Moving on, so process roles and responsibilities, data council. This is obviously a huge topic because we've heard from Clarissa about what the work that Accord's doing, but the actual CDR and all the questions that come out of CDRs, who's going to be responsible for it, who's got to approve it, when, and what about, all these things. There's a consultation happening. Now, I've only just seen the questionnaire. It's absolutely massive. It's not a 2-minute job. It's not just skim that. It will take you quite a bit of time. So that's starting in February. I'm not quite sure the significance of the timing, but it's above my pay grade, but it's happening in February. And it will finish in March with conclusions by April, I believe. But you will need to prepare. I suppose how members can support themselves with picking up on that one would be prepared to get involved in that consultation and get some resource to look at it internally. It's not just going to be one of you sitting there going, yeah, I'll skim down and answer a few questions. It's pretty detailed. I think there's up to about 70 something questions. And there's a lot of material to look through. So you don't have to engage with it, but ultimately the engagement's going to happen, the consultation and the outputs from that will drive us forward as a market and answer a lot of these questions that many of us still have and that haven't been answered yet. So that's around CDR stuff. One of the other things we're doing is digital services definition. I'm not particularly close to this myself, but we are involved with the framework, so we were supporting that through 22. I guess when it comes to signing up to these services, you need to know what they actually consist of. It's not looking at commercials. That's part of the overall digital process servicing agreement. So the digital services definition is just one component of that overall agreement, of which commercials is also a part. But we're going out to market in consultation. I know at least one person in this room is involved as an SME in that. I think if you really desperately want to get involved, there's probably still a chance to do it. I think we've proactively gone out, but if you want to come to us and say, can we play in that space, I think we're probably supposed to do that. So that's happening through this year. Alongside that, market acceptance testing. Again, it's not really my area at all, but the LMA typically does get involved with MAT, especially around DMC stuff. So we are supporting that around the structure and the strategy, making sure that there's effective coverage and oversight and so on, and governance, and there's commercials involved in that as well. So we're involved in all of that, which will, I suppose, ultimately support the overall business readiness planning. I mentioned the DA data strategy. We're not responsible for that. That's Lloyd's DA data strategy, but through our DAC and Carl and my colleague, we're very involved with that. I don't really know too much about it, kind of waiting for it to land and see what it's saying and whether we like it. But clearly that's a big piece that we're actively involved with in Lloyd's and in the market. I guess finally, just around comms. So, we very much supporting the EC10. So we have aligned ourselves to each of the groups. So I'm aligned with Wendy on EC3 and somebody else within, colleagues of mine within the LMA aligning, just to make sure we are supporting each other, saying the same things, coming at it from sort of both sides. We will be looking to run bite-sized sessions this year. We've done those in the past. I've got in mind at least 3 or 4 bite-sized sessions that I plan to run through Q2. Well, maybe back into Q1, Q2, maybe into Q3, just to help support messaging and understanding and the delivery of this kind of stuff. They've been a good format that worked pretty well. So we'll be doing more of those. Clearly the playbook, and generally, the LMA is a sort of a central hub and a conduit, and you're very free and welcome to please knock on our door at any time and ask questions, because we're here for our members. So I think that's me. Any questions? Great. On to James.
The delight of getting old. How many pairs of glasses do we all own? I'll stay this side to give you next one a bit of a rest, because obviously you can look at that way. So also it needs to be nice close to the door when you start throwing things out. So say, please excuse the glasses going on and off, because I can't see you without them on. I can't see this with them on. So what are the brokers and Lima doing? Well, not everybody be shouting. It's an normal store. The brokers don't do anything. I know that. I've been one for 30 years. Actually, truthfully, we do quite a bit. So as a community, we're looking at the end-to-end process, not just the premium claims, that we're very much concentrating on here today. So in no particular order, I'm going to run through some of the stuff we've been doing over the last 12 months, and also some of the stuff we're looking to build on over the next 12 months. So starting the playbook. Everybody else has mentioned it, thought I should too. Nice 81-page document that can put you to sleep in 30 minutes. It is a very, very good document, like has been said many times, full of TBDs, far too much blank space in there. Hopefully we can start filling in those blanks. MRC version 3, a subject very close to my heart. Because some of you may know, I've been chairing a working group that's going through the 3,150 individual comments we got back from you. So I'd like to thank you for making my mind managing misery for the last 3 months. We have actually got there with a lot of it though. We've got, in fact, I'm not sharing the session now. It's going on, so I'm missing one. So thank you for inviting me to this. But we're nearly there. We've got 1 session this week, 1 session next week, and then we'll start putting it out. It'll go into brokers. It's going to follow the normal process we do with the MRC, in as much as they will get it, they'll have a 6-month adoption period, and then that will be the standard. If we started doing it as a separate IMRC and MRC thing, it's the Wild West. One of the reasons we did the MRC in the first place was every different class of business had a different MRC slip. Those of you old enough, it really truly was the Wild West. So doing it this way, we can't keep everybody in the same boat. Is it perfect? Of course not. But the great thing about the MRC is we do it every year, so we get another crack at it next year just to tie things up. This will be the big structural change. Structural change to the document is the thing that costs brokers a lot of money because their tech suppliers have an annoying habit of charging for changing templates. And when you go to some of the large brokers, they've got 15,000 templates of big brokers. My old broker, which is only I used to work for, only a 100-man broking outfit, we still had 25 templates. So it's expensive. And our supplier charge 250 quid a month. So, small CDR changes. So obviously we've been working closely with Clarissa and her team. We've been working along with the JSP and all that sort of thing, just to point out, well, hang on, it's all well and good you calling it that. But really, truly, why do we care? What's the broker give monkeys about their risk careful? It's nothing to do with that. It's not, doesn't, their systems don't rely on it. Yours do. So obviously those are the conversations. PPL. The first demo of PPL to the wider broker community was yesterday. Well received from what I understand, now 45 minutes worth of that. Today there's another session on upload, and there's another session tomorrow on bulk upload. Archive upload today, bulk upload. And then we're going to be doing those. So we're supporting those. That is joint PPL and Lever. So we're pushing that piece of work out there to get all our brokers across. And please do not ask me the nasty question of when a broker's going to cut over. Once we actually have a full bedding down, when we can actually access the system, they'll finalise their plans. An idea, but I'm not going to say it up down here. Say what to what. What else? SME resource for the digital services work. As mentioned earlier, so we're providing a lot of our members, a lot of our experts on joining these work streams, various program increment work streams and the like. So they were heavily involved in all of that. One thing we've not mentioned today is actually there's a data centre move coming up in September. Now, it's not necessarily technically part of this whole piece, but it is actually a foundation piece for DXC to actually deliver these services. You know, we can turn the market off for 5 days. You know, we've been obviously working very, very hard on that one and trying to stop my brokers killing each other. The fact they can't pay people as a claims for 5 days. It's all fun, always fun. Obviously, we talk about the FCP, it was touched on there. We've obviously been discussing and helping Lloyd and people work through that. Obviously, there are some challenges about how it works, making sure clauses go into contracts, making sure the fact that ledgers actually add up. Strange enough, the regulator gets very cross with us if our client money ledgers don't work. So obviously making sure they will work. Minor, as Big mentioned, delegate authority. Obviously, we're working very closely trying to influence a lot of that delegate authority work. The changes over the last few years have not been very friendly to my community, to the point of the fact they are now inputting 4 times the data they used to. And because none of these systems are connected, some of them are actually queuing up to 3 or 4 times themselves. Hence, if anybody's looked at the right first time breaks recently, you'll see they're through the floor. Unsurprising when you're keying the data through 4 times. So obviously we're keen to do that. Still a lot of clarity needed across the whole piece, you know, as Alan's mentioned, so others have. But the output of the roles and responsibilities at work is going to be key. A project that I became involved in 24 hours ago. Apparently, the committee discussed yesterday wanted me to look at it. Would have been nice to give me some notice, but there we go. Ho ho, that's Rob Myers for you. I was rude to his face today behind his back, so don't worry about it. The challenge, though, can't be underestimated when looking at the broker community. For those of you who don't really know, and I'm sure you all flick around the Lloyd's website on a regular basis because it is obviously the go-to website. You know, forget the BBC, forget the Daily Mail. No, this is the go-to website, Lloyd's, obviously. There are 300 registered Lloyd's brokers, there or thereabouts. Now, put that in some colour around that 300 brokers. Just writing this down a bit. Lever represent 95% by number, about 99% by GWP. So we are truly representative. And it's, you have to pay to get out of it. It's not unlike the other name, we're optional. So we must do a reasonable job of the lines. So of that 300 brokers, 275 are less than 100 staff. I know because I used to work for the 21st Century Broker. 100 of those brokers are less than 25 staff. And actually 50 of them are less than 5. So it's a big, big job. And they're global. You know, we've got members in China, we've got members in Australia, we've got members all over the world. So we're going to have some fun with this. That doesn't mean to say it's impossible. You do have the slight advantage of you get into the software supplier market. Maren, keep me honest, there's about 10 broker suppliers. Actually, one of those suppliers is a 60% market share. So, as it happens to be DXC, that does help matters somewhat. So, you know, I'm quite confident we can actually get this across the line, principally because we have the big stick that is DXC. If they get their ducks in a row, we can deliver. So what that, I suppose finishing off is the fact that everybody said, if you want to reach out and talk about it afterwards, feel free to contact me. Unlike the LMA, I'm an ex-retro broker, so as a result, coffee isn't the only thing on offer. So, you know, please feel free to give me a call if you want to have a chat about it. I tend to be rather brutal and honest about this stuff. I know it upsets a few people, but that is the way I think it's easy to talk about. Any questions, or am I blinded with science?
I think you blinded everybody with whiskey, but.
Mine as well.
Thank you very much, James. The final association, the IUA, obviously we've had a note from Louise Day. We wanted her to join today. Unfortunately, she couldn't join today. So there's a question out at the back there.
Sorry, Alan. One of the questions I had on the previous topic. We've just seen on the slide that we've got an adopt list by September, right, under the Lloyd's bylaw. So with brokers having over 100 slip templates, how are we going to achieve this by that time?
It's not everything's done. What will happen is if anything renews from that point will be on the new template.
So from September renewal.
So effectively,
anything those 300 brokers you would have adopted that across all of their classes, across all of those.
We do it every year, so why should it be different this time?
No, I'm just making sure I've understood that.
Yeah, so the idea, that's why we have 6 months lead time. So they've got 6 months to get templates updated, 6 months to move forward. And essentially what they'll do is they'll do probably a bit like the PPL adoption will be, is it'll be the renewal will be done in the new template.
Okay. And are we as carriers supposed to talk to our brokers to sort of say how they're getting on with that, or is that
You can, if you wish to, that's probably something we'll do anyway. We do it anyway. It is an established process. At the end of the day, the bylaws on you, and you should be doing it under your PBQA anyway.
Yeah.
But at the end of the, it is much easier for brokers to move to one process. So as touched on actually by Clarissa was saying there about, you know, like cycles, EPOP, decon, you know, all of those things being a single process. We come up with one session, brilliant, isn't it? But I think, yeah, I think the brokers will go across to it. It's one of the reasons why we actually decided to use the existing. Will there be outliers? Yeah. Will it really be 100% in September? Of course not. But
will there be a central list that we can access to say that these brokers have moved across so that we can see that?
I think the only place you can ever measure that, now this is me speaking rather than, the only place that can be measured that is DXC and getting people to actually do that measurement, and I'm sure they would love to charge for it.
And we also do have some market engagement with the brokers, not all of them individually, because obviously the numbers that we're talking about here, but some of the larger ones, the top 25, we've got engagement partners supporting those. And then also if you go down to the next kind of 25, there's conversations happening with those. And then the last swathe of smaller brokers, I'm sure between Lieber and the market.
I have on my desk, as I don't know, I have on my desk a baseball bat, a bottle of scotch, a measured bottle. I regard these as the three things that we get this market moving with. So therefore so they are, and I think, and truthfully, I think most will. The reason that I didn't propose to data council this whole idea of going down the old process before election was spoken to me. So as Aon Marshall this, how can I go? Who else did I tap up? Tiger is locked. So I'd actually probably spoke to probably 10 of the top 25 brokers before I proposed this. Everyone went, of course, that's the way to do it. So, I mean, this was, it's supported by those big brokers. I said, can I guarantee it's going to be 100%? Of course I can't. Well, that's silly. Yeah. So I think the vast majority will be.
Thanks. Hopefully that goes to our faces. I just wanted, conscious of time, we've only got a couple of minutes left, just want to make sure the IUA's representation is made. So Louise sends her apologies. Obviously, market transformation is vitally important to the IUA. They do a huge amount in terms of supporting their members, and likewise, she sends her apologies for not being able to hear today, but a small team, so therefore we've offered to cover off her content for her. So in terms of how the IUA is supporting their members, publishing their version of the playbook on the 18th of January. There's a launch session. We'll share information out for that if you haven't received it already. They're also really focusing on more of the kind of central claims accounting and settlement services, because that's where the company markets are most predominantly impacted from under Blueprint 2. And so that briefing will help position that as well. There's also their membership meetings where they regularly focus on Blueprint 2, and of course that engagement around subject matter experts from the company's market into the build workshops that we've been holding. In terms of what they're thinking members can do to help support themselves, it's kind of looking at the playbook to make sure that when it's out next week, to make sure that it's aligned specifically to your tasks. It's engaging with your EC partners. There's myself and Daniela who look after the company markets, to making sure that you've asked all those questions, fully understand Blueprint 2, and really working with your system suppliers or your IT teams. It's regular circulars from the IUA are sent. So again, look out for those. And probably a sentiment to my own heart here, if you aren't sure, ask. The IUA is there to help as much as we're here to help. So please utilise those resources. So that's that from Louise. And just thinking at time, we are actually on time. I know you've been asking questions throughout, which is great. Are there any final questions that you'd like to ask from either any of our presenters or from ourselves before we wrap up?
Well, I mean, that we'll stick around for half an hour, so most of us, obviously, contact the usual engagement partner. Usual queries always a way back and about to my community, but they use that to help us track queries and build out the FAQ. Any questions?
Stand silent, so you need to go to your next meeting, I imagine.
Yeah.
So,
Just quick wrap up then. So thank you to our speakers, James, Chris, Matt, Paul, Rich, and thanks for your time and thanks for your continued engagement. Have a good day.
thank you.